Welcome to the Mental Health Multiverse.
We're your hosts, HB and LB. If you're also on a healing journey and enjoy pop culture, stick around. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of MHM. This is LB, joined with my co-host HB, who, if you're not watching on YouTube, is wearing an Oogie Boogie shirt because that's who we're talking about today. Woohoo!
Oogie Boogie!
Yes, very excited to talk about this one. Specifically, LB here, excited to listen to HB talk about this one. She has a lot to say. I opened our notes doc and there's like an entire dissertation about the movie in its entirety. So if you want to read that, join our Patreon and read HB's essay. I don't have much to add other than similar to what HB's going to say, I didn't watch this until I was an adult. I didn't really get it. I still kind of sort of don't get it, but that's okay. Maybe by the end of this episode that will change. I did watch this this small documentary on Netflix. It's called The Movies That Made Us, and they did like a mini documentary on The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's like 45 minutes, and they talk to the director, who is not Tim Burton, the writer, Danny Elfman, like all of these people who are heavily involved. And it made me appreciate the movie more, but it made me hate Tim Burton even more. So that's all I have to say about that. Yeah,
we'll talk about that later. Yeah, the movie, to piggyback off of that, is directed by, his name is Henry Selick, I think is how you say it. I'm not actually sure. Selick. And it was his directorial debut. So it's kind of wild that they just slap Tim Burton's name on it. Tim Burton is a producer. He wrote the original poem that the story is based on, and he had a huge hand in the design of the aesthetic and the design of all the characters.
Well, but according to the documentary, he everything went through him for approval, and he was like a real, what's the best way I can say this? He was kind of a real diva about it. Like, they had ideas for a different ending for Oogie Boogie, which we can get into. They had all of these ideas as far as like the design and story, and I guess Tim Burton would just like throw things, punch like a fax machine. He kicked a wall, all of these things. So like, yeah, but he also like wasn't that involved other than just like putting his stamp of approval on anything. Like, he wasn't there in LA or San Francisco where they would like alternate filming and all of these things. Anyway, continue. You can just watch that 45-minute documentary on Netflix because I don't remember everything, but
I haven't seen it, so I am very curious.
It's really good. It's really cool learning about the behind the scenes stuff. Like, Sally was a very, very different character. She was supposed to be this more like femme fatale with like pointy looking boobs, and and then the writer, who was at the time either engaged or living with, or they were like boyfriend girlfriend, I'm not sure, with the singing voice and the composer of Jack. So yeah. Anyway, there's all these fun little tidbits as far as like the budget and how they got the movie approved because they were super over budget and they couldn't cut it down and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, it's really interesting.
It was one of the first of its time for like stop motion animation. And so the movie came out in 1993 for anyone who doesn't know. And the director, basically after Nightmare Before Christmas, he went on to direct James and the Giant Peach, which terrified me as a child, and Coraline, which terrified me as a teenager. I saw Coraline came out when I was like, I don't know, in my late teens, and that movie terrified me. Like, I can't remember when it came out, but I remember we saw it in the movie theater when I worked there, and I worked at the movie theater between 16 and 22. So sometime Coraline came out then, and we saw the movie, and I may have been a little intoxicated, but it was so scary that we couldn't finish it, and I had to leave the theater, and I've never tried to watch it since. So if we do an episode on Coraline, that will be my story about it. But anyway, both James and the Giant Peach and Coraline are like pivotal creative works within the stop motion, the field of stop motion animation. So, and also another little fun fact is that Henry Selick has hidden little Jack Skellingtons in every film that he's worked on. So,
that's
cute. That's cute. Fun. But anyway, to get a little bit more into what we're actually talking about, which is The Nightmare Before Christmas, specifically Oogie Boogie. But again, I have a lot to say about the movie as a whole. This is one of my favorite movies, so it will be fun to discuss with you as someone who just like doesn't get it because I've always loved this movie. But I have another best friend who hated it, and so she and I have had that back and forth as well already.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so on Disney Plus, the synopsis of Nightmare Before Christmas is Pumpkin King Jack Skellington tries to take over Christmas. That's pretty much it. But if you want a more in-depth synopsis of it, after another Halloween being the best of the best, Jack Skellington feels unfulfilled in his duties as Pumpkin King. And while he's lamenting about this, he has a whole song about it. He stumbles into the woods and comes across this clearing with a collection of odd trees, and each tree represents a different holiday. And he's in awe of the Christmas Town door, which has a Christmas tree on it. And it's colorful. And when he opens it, some snow kind of comes out, and he's like, "Ooh, what is this?" And he decides to close it, but then the snow kind of sucks him in and he falls in. And when he lands in Christmas Town, he's absolutely in awe of his findings there. If you're familiar with the song "What's This?" That's what that song is all about. And when he thinks that taking over Christmas for himself is just what he's been missing because he feels like he's been missing something. And he's very well intentioned in his takeover, but the people slash monsters of Halloweentown don't quite understand the spirit of Christmas. So they make everything really scary. And Jack even unintentionally has Santa kidnapped. And he says to the kids, "Leave that no count Oogie Boogie out of this." So but they have their fingers crossed behind their backs because they're little tricksters and they are Oogie's boys, as the mayor calls them. So they take Santa to Oogie Boogie, who almost kills him. And we will definitely talk about that later. Sally has a vision that Jack's Christmas is going to go up in flames. And when she tries to express that to him, he doesn't listen to her. Then everything blows up in his face. And essentially the lesson learned is something along the lines of like coming home to yourself or coming home to like he went on this grand adventure just to realize that like he was happy being Pumpkin King all along. So obviously we'll focus on Oogie Boogie, but there's a little like, is Jack a villain? Could Jack be perceived as a villain here? There's a lot of characters that I think, I mean, it's a monster town, so like I guess a lot of different characters could be perceived as the villain, like Dr. Finkelstein. But yeah, a little bit of
Yeah,
uh,
I don't think there's really like a clear-cut hero or I mean, other than Oogie Boogie trying to kill Santa Claus and Sally. But speaking of Oogie Boogie, the voice of this iconic character passed away earlier this year, Ken Page. So RIP. We were shocked to hear that, especially because over the course of this season specifically,
been talking about a lot of people who have passed away.
we have. Oh my gosh. But anyway, so we'll dedicate this episode to him and refresh my memory. Who else has he voiced? I just feel like Oogie Boogie is one of the most iconic and recognizable.
He's the voice of the gator in All Dogs Go to Heaven.
You
Have
know,
you?
I haven't seen that in a while and I've kind of blocked it from my memory because it's just so fucking sad.
Oh, I love that movie. Yeah, there's like a big, there's this whole scene with like an alligator and he sings and he dances and he takes the dogs. Like, I can't remember if it's like, I haven't seen this movie in a really long time either, but I can't remember if it's sort of like a representation of what is it called when you're like in between heaven and hell, like you haven't gone anywhere yet.
Purgatory.
Yeah, I can't remember if it's like a representation of purgatory or if it happens in real life or if it happens in heaven. I can't remember, but it's like this alligator singing to the main character dog. And it's this really like sultry sort of, very queer coded, like, yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I don't remember that at all. He was in Cats. I don't know
Mm,
what who specifically he was in Cats, but you know, that makes sense. Dream Girls. A lot of musicals it looks like. And then as far as TV shows,
definitely a singer forward, like a
yes, absolutely. Yeah, nothing that I recognize as far as TV shows. Who does he play in Cats? He plays Old Deuteronomy. That makes sense for his voice. Yeah, we watched the, remake from a couple years ago for one of our movie nights, and Wow, that was an experience. Anywho, uh okay, so tell us a little bit more about Oogie Boogie's relationship to Jack and their whole feud over Halloween and Halloween Town. I know it's not called Halloweentown, but I don't know what it's called.
It is called Halloweentown.
Oh, it is Halloweentown. I see. I was paying attention. I've seen this before.
Yeah. It is called Halloweentown. Yeah, and Christmastown is called Christmastown, and Eastertown is Eastertown. They're all just the town of whatever holiday they are. But they don't really, in the movie specifically, Nightmare Before Christmas, they don't really go into the backstory of their rivalry very much. I think Oogie Boogie, he's obviously the boogeyman, so like the thing that children are afraid of year round, not just at Halloween, whereas
Mhm.
Jack is really the king of Halloween specifically. But Oogie Boogie has sort of become the town pariah. Like all of the monsters in Halloween Town, or creatures, I guess I should say, in Halloween Town have sort of ostracized him because he's so evil and scary. And I think they just don't like the way that he treats people because even though Halloween Town is like about tricks, because it's Halloween Town, so it's like trick or treat, whatever. Like everybody's really sneaky and spooky and creepy and tricksters. But Oogie Boogie is like genuinely evil
Mhm.
and legitimately like kills people. So I guess he doesn't quite fit the mold of just being spooky. Like he's actually terrifying, I guess, if that makes sense. So I think like for he crosses the boundaries of the people of Halloween Town. So he has a lair that's sort of on the outskirts of the town and the people of Halloween Town seem afraid of him, and it seems like Jack is the only person that's not afraid of Oogie Boogie. And it seems like Jack is the only person who really can stand up to him. Because even
Mm.
when Lock, Shock, and Barrel, who are the three kids, the ones that are called Oogie's boys, even though one of them's a girl, when the kids show up at the meeting that Jack is sort of assigning people things to do for him taking over Christmas, the mayor is scared of them. He's like, "Aren't those Oogie's boys? Like, what are they doing here?" And he seems a little scared. So that's kind of what I take away from their feud or rivalry. It's like not necessarily a feud or rivalry, but I know that there are Disney medias that cover it more. Like I know there's a video game. If you go on Oogie Boogie's like Wikipedia, not Wikipedia, but like the fandom one, the Disney one, it explains like all of the forms of media that he shows up in. So he's like in two different video games. And one of them is called Oogie's Revenge, which he comes back. So, like, spoilers if you haven't seen this. At the end, Jack sort of unravels him because Oogie Boogie is a burlap sack and he's filled with bugs, which is really nasty. It's very
It's so
disgusting.
gross. It's so
Uh,
gross.
but apparently, according to the video game Oogie's Revenge, Lock, Shock, and Barrel put all the bugs back together and put him inside of a new burlap sack. And
Which is also kind of weird because most of the bugs fall into that like vat of ooze and
yeah.
disintegrate
Well,
while
that's
they're
why I'm
scared.
like, what is canon?
My
Like
bugs. Yeah.
my bugs. Yeah, it's
So
really
creepy.
disgusting the way that he dies. But yeah, so it's like what is actually considered canon? I don't know. I've only ever seen the movie, so I can't speak to other media that he shows up in. But it does just seem like Jack is really the only one that's not afraid of Oogie Boogie, and everyone else
Hmm.
is terrified of him, and he's become sort of like a town pariah in a way.
Yeah. So I am on that Disney wiki, and some of the background that it provides is that Oogie Boogie and Jack Skellington's rivalry traces back 1 year before the events of the film. So, after hearing stories about the supposed Pumpkin King of Halloweentown, Oogie Boogie becomes obsessed with outclassing Jack as the scariest ghoul. And so, in doing so, he tries to develop a coup to take over Halloween and rebrand it as Crawloween, which is dedicated to bugs. But his scheme is foiled by Jack, who punishes him by putting him in a lair in Lock, Shock, and Barrel's treehouse. And then that's kind of like where we, I guess, pick up with the following Halloween. Um, I
Where
wish
like
that
do they
was
say I was gonna say, do they say where that backstory comes from at all? Like, is that just unofficial canon, or is it
no,
in some
it's
sort?
The Nightmare Before Christmas, the Pumpkin King, which is
Oh, it's a book. It's a Twisted Tale, no, or a prequel?
no, oh, it's the video game. Okay, so this is interesting. The Nightmare Before Christmas, The Pumpkin King is a video game for Game Boy Advance, which was released in 2005.
Hmm.
The events of this game take place before the movie, but the game was also released as this at the same time as the video game you were talking about, Oogie's
Oh,
Revenge. So that's
okay.
kind of interesting. So we have the film. So I would like to think it's canon based on this information we're getting. So we have the movie, and then the video games are like the prequel and sequel to those events, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting that they go into a prequel and a sequel without like actually developing it into anything except for a video game.
I just think maybe at the time, well, one, this wasn't like a classic Disney movie. It wasn't even released by Disney. It was their sister company Touchstone, because Disney
Yeah.
was like, this is not meant for children, clearly. So we are not going to put our name on it. So they went with Touchstone, and then no one knew what this was. They were like, what is this? And so that's why Tim Burton's name is on it, because they're like, oh, he's this big name right now. Well, I mean,
Recognizable. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. No one's going to know Henry Selick, which is a real shame, because from what I remember of the documentary and the way that they describe it, it's that like Tim Burton had the idea and basically like popped out the egg, but then Henry Selick hatched it, and he like took the time to nurture it and make it grow and help it grow and blah 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 blah. So he definitely deserves more kudos. And I might have fever dream this. I might be confusing it with something else, but I'm pretty sure in the documentary at one point they lost a lot of the content that they filmed around the stop motion. And so one woman stayed up and filmed the entirety of like act 1 or 2, or not the entire movie, but like a good chunk of it by herself to recover
Mm,
the movie. Anyway, but someone
interesting.
fact check me on that, because I didn't get to watch the documentary before we started filming. And I watched the documentary back in 2020 when it was released, because there weren't very many things to watch then. Anyway,
I did love how many women had a hand in the film, though, and I do
yeah.
like the change that you've mentioned about Sally, because you were saying at the beginning you don't know if this movie has a hero. I would say that Sally, in a way, is the hero, but didn't have the tools to she didn't have the tools to prevent what happened from happening, but she tried the best that she could, you know?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I like Sally a lot. I like the changes that they had made to her. I like her as a character. I think she's very clever. Like I can on some level I relate to her wanting to run away from her, abuser. It's one of those like weird complicated relationships, because he created Sally solely to serve him and to be his whatever she is to him. And but she has this like level of awareness to know that like she is being mistreated and wants out, and so she's like poisoning him. And I think she's very clever and very smart and clearly very compassionate, which I do think is like an interesting juxtaposition to the rest of Halloweentown. Everyone else is very like spooky, scary, gory. Everything has to be horrible and heinous. And she's like, but, well, I think a lot of it has to do with just Jack. But I think she's, very kind.
Yeah, well, I just read Sally's Lament, which is the Disney Twisted
Oh,
Tale
right.
that just came out by Mary Mancusi. First of all, it's so wholesome. If anyone is looking for
Oh,
something really lighthearted and wholesome to read between Christmas and New Year's or whatever, it's really, really cute. In fact, Sally's character in that reminded me of Giselle in Enchanted, how she comes to the
uh,
real world and is sort of like, "Oh, I don't know what anything is." That Sally felt very much like Giselle to me when I was reading it. And I like the level, even though it's a Disney twisted tale, I like the level that Mancusi like put into that actually being Sally's personality, and not just because she has a crush on Jack does she behave
mm,
this way. Like she genuinely longs for more, and while she is genuinely longing for more, she stumbles upon Jack singing his song, and
mm-hmm.
she relates to that, and that's the moment that she decides that she has feelings for him because she can relate to him so much, and she sees a different side of him that she had never seen before because he has this facade that he is so
Yeah.
confident and all of that, but he's actually not really happy with the way that his life is going. And so her seeing his vulnerability is actually what makes her like fall in love with him.
Mm,
So I do really like that because we don't get to see much from her perspective in this movie.
Right.
It is Jack's movie. So, but yeah, so if you're looking for something to read, definitely recommend that. It's really, really cute. But what do you feel about them getting together in the end?
I don't really have strong feelings either way. I think it's cool that I don't know. I'm thinking of the Blink 182 song, right? That's like, we can live like Jack and Sally if we want to. And I didn't know who
Yeah.
Jack and Sally were. Like, I loved that song growing up, and I had no idea who Jack and Sally were. And I was like, interesting. Who's Jack? Who's Sally? I don't care. I like the song. And then I watched this movie and I was like, oh, I see. I think having watched the documentary, though, it gave me a deeper appreciation for it obviously post watching it. I think when I watched it initially, I was like, the fangirl gets the boy, I guess. But apparently, in creating and in writing Sally, the writer put a lot of herself in it, and it actually the director related a lot to it because he was like, she captured the relationship I had with my wife so well in that my love for my wife encourages me to be a better person. And
Mm,
that's kind of what
mhm.
Sally does to Jack, because she's very much like loves him, wants what's best for him, and in doing so is not just a yes man like everyone else is. She's like, hey, no, I had a really bad vision, Jack, this is a terrible idea. But yeah, them getting together in the end, I think it's cute. Yeah, you know.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know if you would hate it because so when I made my best friend watch this movie with me, and she was my best friend at the time, we're no longer as close as we used to be. She hated the fact that they got together at the end, and she called
Oh.
Sally pathetic.
Oh, that's
And
strong.
I that maybe there's other people listening who agree with this, but I kind of took that personally because the reason why I love Sally so much, in addition to everything else that we've talked about, is that I kind of related to her in the sense that, like, when I was younger, I used to kind of pine after people who never really gave me a second thought. And so to see them get together at the end was really heartening for me because I was like, oh, maybe one day I'll pine after someone who actually cares about me, you know? And I do think at the end her song is weirdly placed because it's right after Jack doesn't listen to her and goes up into the sky, and then she starts singing about how much she loves him. Uh,
Yeah.
but but when you really listen to it, she's questioning whether his idiotic actions are going to get him killed. And that's why she's expressing her love for him because it's like the only chance she has because he might die because he's an idiot, which I also kind of think is funny. But like one of the lyrics is like, and will we ever end up together, right? And having watched this after just seeing Wicked, have you seen Wicked yet?
No, not the
Okay.
movie. I have seen the stage production, so there aren't really spoilers
Okay.
unless they've changed a lot of things.
This shouldn't be a spoiler. It's just about a song that's in Wicked. The song called I'm Not That Girl, where Elphaba's singing
Oh,
about her crush
yeah,
on Fiero, even though he's
yeah.
technically with Glinda at the time, right? And
Belinda.
that I was like, oh, I never realized how similar Sally's song was to I'm Not That Girl. Like I never put two and two
Interesting.
together. But it's
Yeah.
Sally's song is really just her being like, will he notice me? Does he know my feelings for him? And I'm Not
Mm,
That Girl is kind of like I've never been the one that's been chosen. So I
yeah.
related to
Yeah.
both of those songs very hard, but never put two and two together that they're that similar. So that's why I kind of like that they get together in the end, even though like Jack, I think he does have this really kind of obtuse personality, but I do think he starts to recognize the ways in which Sally is helping him and cares for him, and she kind of grounds him at the end, and he does end up being the one who saves her from Oogie Boogie to bring it back full circle to talk about the villain.
Yeah. But to
So,
be fair, like she went into it by herself with a whole plan to free Santa Claus. Like she was ready and prepared to take it on all by herself. And it just so happens that she couldn't because, like you said, she didn't really have all the great tools to do so.
mhm.
I mean, is literally stitched together. So it's very easy to just like take her apart. Uh,
Yeah.
and then Jack comes in and saves them. But
Mhm.
I never saw Sally as a damsel in distress at all during this movie, even like the first time I watched it. I think very much like Cinderella. She just wanted more and tried to take matters into her own hands. But, you also have to acknowledge capability. And she just didn't have the capability to fully break free and do a lot of the things. But that doesn't mean she didn't try. And that doesn't mean she was a damsel in distress. But yes, to take it full circle back to Oogie Boogie, he is so interesting. I kind of want to talk about his aesthetic as far as like his lair.
I love it.
I like it. I think it's really interesting that it's very casino
Yeah. Like he's got a
based.
gambling problem. Like that's how he chooses who to kill because he's like, let me roll the dice. And then he cheats. He's a cheater, right? So he'll
He
be like,
is.
slam the table
Snake
to,
eyes.
yeah. I just love that it's juxtaposed, right? Because it's like neon, bright colors, lively, but then everything is dead and it's about death. And then when it's dark, it's really dark. Like I think it's cool that like sometimes he's bright green, like he is in my shirt, right? Like sometimes
Yeah.
he's this bright neon green color, and sometimes he's like almost just black and white in his dark burlap sack, like when the neon lights aren't on. And I
Yeah.
like that just juxtaposition in his design and the design of his lair.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really interesting. I like the subtle like messaging, I guess.
His like personality. Yeah, it's like he's a gambler, he's a cheater, he's a snake. He's all of these things kind of come into play in that. He gambles with people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think his songs are classics. They're really cool. He's very sassy. He has a little bit. He has a big temper. And I think again that just follows the same train of thought as far as like he's unpredictable because gambling is so unpredictable. And I hate gambling. It like gives me so much anxiety. For one of a friend's birthdays, we were in Reno or Tahoe and we went to a casino and like I couldn't do it. I didn't like how unpredictable it was. And I think it's just interesting that Oogie Boogie is very much the same way. It is also kind of interesting because you would think that the mayor, this two-faced mayor, would have more of that
Mm.
vibe. I just think that's like an interesting.
I'm glad you brought up the mayor though, because I feel like I have a question and a thought that I can't quite formulate, so maybe you can help me.
Mm.
The mayor, as you said, is two-faced, but he's not two-faced in a way that he's like one side of him is lying to you and the other side of him is telling the truth. He's two-faced in that one side is really emotional and the other side is like
Yeah.
really jolly. When he's sad, he has to switch to his like emotional face, but when he's like Jack is back and he starts, saying praising the Pumpkin King, he switches back. And I just think it's interesting to have a character that is two-faced but that isn't a bad
Like isn't
person, quote unquote.
manipulative.
Yes. And
Yeah.
I think it speaks to like I don't want to say anything like I don't want to generalize like bipolar or personality disorders or anything like that, but I think it could be a commentary on like going from one emotion to the other doesn't have to be that extreme,
Extreme. Yeah.
you know? I guess. I don't know if you have any further thoughts on that.
Well, just because this is like more fresh and more clear in my mind, I was thinking about the Lego cop from the Lego movie. I don't know if you've seen that.
I don't remember which Lego movie, like the original one.
Yeah, like the original one.
It's
He
been a
works
while.
he works for the the big bad guy, and he has like, I mean, his is like a little bit more clear because it's very much like good cop bad cop. So there's like the almost noir-esque gruff cop, and then on the other side it's like, oh hi everybody, I'm Jolly and would you like a cookie kind of a thing. But the mayor is it is very interesting, this like constant switch of like, I don't know, the way I kind of see it too is almost like it's not quite anxiety because it's more like any strong emotion. It's that like really worried, really kind of scary looking face. And then when everything's okay, he's like, oh, just kidding, everybody. We're good. I don't know. To me, that also feels like most politicians, like whatever,
Mm,
like the face that they will put
like a
on.
mask.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm,
There's something there around that. Yeah.
yeah. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
feel it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know how Oogie's boys became Oogie's boys. That's not anything that's discussed in the movies.
Mm.
And if like what you said in the video game, they were like he was basically banished to underneath their treehouse. Like, were they also banished at one point? Were they ostracized from Halloweentown for being little menaces? Like, what does
They
or
are
is that
menaces to society for sure.
they they are in their song to go with descriptions of Oogie Boogie too? I think they exercise their loyalty to Oogie Boogie also out of fear because they like give him food and I mean, they seem to also genuinely enjoy it, so it's hard to tell. But they say, like, Mr. Oogie Boogie is the meanest guy around. If I were on his boogie list, I'd get out of town. So to me, that says, like, I'm going to stay on his good side. Like, because if once you cross to the bad side, like, who knows what's going to happen, you know?
Yeah. No, it definitely feels like them feeding him and helping him find his victims is just self-serving, self-preservation. It kind of feels like they're
Mhm.
paying tribute to this really scary thing to stay in his good graces.
Yeah, like they're sacrificing to the Oogie Boogie god or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's exactly what they do with Santa Claus with because for some reason Jack trusts them.
That's something I don't quite understand if that scene was cut or if that was just to like throw in stakes or something. I never really understood why he would trust because he even tells them too, like, don't bring Oogie into this or whatever. And they're like, we won't, but their fingers are crossed. And it's like, but
Yeah,
they're going to.
right? Like you did this, Jack. Like maybe it's Jack wasn't thinking with his brain because he made a lot of idiotic decisions. And it's like when you're so, that's an example of being like so hyper fixated on something that you're not actually like thinking about the consequences of your actions, maybe. But to talk about like the scenes that Oogie Boogie is in, we're talking about another character that only appears kind of in the last half of the movie, right? Like in the
Mm-hmm.
last 20 minutes of the movie. He appears earlier, but it's just very briefly. He is the shadow in the moon at night at the beginning, which
Yeah.
is a fun little fact. It's like people have speculated, is that him? It is him. And then we see him when the kids are coming up with their plan to kidnap Santa Claus is the first time we really kind of see him because they use the bug this like bug, I guess, as an example, as a representation of Santa Claus, and then they send it down to Oogie Boogie and he sucks the bug away. We don't really see him, but we get the visual of how terrifying he is. And then once Santa Claus is there is when we really get like that's when the full scene with Oogie Boogie starts.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what I'm trying to get to here is like his behaviors, his actions, him being the quote unquote villain of this movie. He's like, "Ooh, my kids have brought me a they've delivered something to me on a silver platter." He plays with his prey. Like he brings the games in, the gambling, all of that. He's playing with
Yeah.
it. He's having a lot of fun, which is kind of terrifying, right?
Mm-hmm. I just think there's something there as far as like Oogie Boogie being the boogeyman, and that's who he is. And I don't know if it's quite accurate to like he's definitely the antagonist of the film, but I don't know if he's necessarily the villain when there's no clear hero on the other side because
Mm.
you can make an argument that Jack is the hero just because they're at odds and they face off against each other.
Or Sally.
Or Sally, yeah. I would probably veer on the side of like Sally is more so the hero of the movie than Jack is. Because yeah, Jack fucks a lot of shit up. But I think there's something there as far as like in the end, Jack realizes that he is the Pumpkin King and Halloweentown is his domain, and trying to veer outside of that causes more harm than good. And I think when I was listening to you talk, all I could think was like, I don't know, he's just being Oogie Boogie. Like Oogie Boogie is just being himself.
Yeah.
And so like you said, like Lock, Shock, and Barrel brought him this thing. he doesn't care who it is, what it is. He's like, yay, I get to torture it and have fun with this new plaything. So yeah.
Yeah, and then Sally comes to save Santa because Jack has fucked everything up. And she's like, the
Mm-hmm.
only person who can fix this is Santa. And she goes to save him, and then she fails. She tries to trick Oogie Boogie, and yeah, like we've brought up a couple times, like she did her best. She did her
Mm-hmm.
best, and she ends up getting also caught in the trap. And then once Jax shows up, even the scene where Jack shows up is crazy. Like the way that Oogie Boogie has like these like soldiers that actually shoot real guns, and like the cards that have the knives that are like slicing
Yes.
everywhere. I was
Yeah.
like, this is wild. This is absolutely unhinged. Like that whole scene, incredibly unhinged, but still Jack ends up winning because he just pulls the seam of Oogie Boogie and his burlap sack falls apart.
I would kind of
So,
love a little standoff between Radigan and Oogie Boogie to see who could create the more elaborate and effective trap.
yes, I love that idea. I kind of thought the same thing too. I was like, ooh, he's like, you know,
They're both very creative and they like their traps and their mechanisms and they have
their
a lot of time on their
games.
hands clear. And the games, yeah.
Yeah. I found when I was doing other research for the podcast, I found a Screen Rant article that for some reason was naming the characters of Nightmare Before Christmas by their Myers-Briggs personality type. I was
Oh,
like, this is random. Oogie Boogie was labeled as an ENTJ. So extroverted, intuitive, thinking, and judging. And I don't know, the explanation was he's a natural born leader who only sees roadblocks in his path as challenges to overcome and take pride in. He's the commander. Forceful is a word used regularly to describe an ENTJ. It's his monster and his bug's way or the highway, is what this article says. So I thought that was interesting. I am an ENFP. I don't know if we've ever discussed our personality types on here before.
I haven't taken the Myers-Briggs one in a really long time. I know when I took it in college, I was an INTP, INFJ, one of those two. And then when I took it again, I've always been introverted, so no matter what. But I know that the like last two letters have changed over the course of my life. And then in recent years, I've learned that the Myers-Briggs stuff is, or that like
Problematic.
the people who created or the person who created Myers-Briggs is a little problematic and stuff. But the only like thing I'll tag on to that is I think personality tests can be very helpful for people who grew up very much like myself, who didn't really have a great sense of self, and can help kind of, well, it's not going to be like you are this. I think it can help give a little framework or like a little guidance as far as like, does this relate? Does this resonate? If it does, maybe why? Like, what can I see in myself? And if it doesn't, maybe, that's okay too. Take what resonates and leave what doesn't, kind of a thing.
Hmm.
I am more so into, what's it called? The Enneagram. So I am
Oh,
a one wing nine, which is the perfectionist and peacemaker coming together. So
ooh.
that is very accurate. So yeah, I definitely see
Yeah.
that. I definitely see Oogie as like extroverted. He's charismatic, and I don't even know if charismatic is the right word, but he's very influential.
Hmm.
The
Yeah.
intuitive part is interesting because my mind goes to like he rolls dice in the same way I feel like people will pull like oracle cards or tarot cards, but he cheats because he wants to get his way. And then what are the other letters?
Thinking and judging.
Oh,
So
judging for sure.
judging for sure. And then thinking, if it weren't the T, it would be feeling.
He does seem, well, see, I feel like Jack is a little bit more thinking because he's very logical. He pulls out the book on the scientific method when he's like trying to figure out how to make
Yeah.
Christmas his own thing. I feel like Oogie is more swayed by feeling, and there doesn't seem like there's a lot of thought or logic in his actions other than it might seem a little calculating just because he has all of these traps and all these different ways to torture people, but I don't think
Yeah.
there's a lot of
I think they were going by like what the brackets that happen after that because of the specific like Myers-Briggs test that gives you like a name, whereas his name is the commander with it when
Mm,
you're an ENTJ. I'm a campaigner, I think, when I'm an ENFP. And then I think there's a bunch of them. So
yeah, I was just looking one up. I think I'm the advocate. I'm not sure. Anyway, so usually in every episode we ask certain questions as far as villains. So we're gonna go through those real quick. We talked a little bit about his background and motivation. I don't really know if we can identify specifically psychological motivations other than he wants to be the big bad and he doesn't like that Jack has been crowned the Pumpkin King. And so he wants that title, and that's kind of like the catalyst for their rivalry. But it's just weird because I don't, and this is why I don't see them as like hero versus villain, them specifically, is because like Oogie isn't specifically doing these things to get Jack.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
At least in the movie that we have, I
Right,
think.
like it would make more sense to see him as he's the film's antagonist, but not necessarily the villain, and he makes more sense as a villain in Oogie's Revenge
Mhm.
because he's actually enacting something upon Jack. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even in the other video game, the prequel that we talked about, where he is trying to dethrone Jack, basically like incite a coup so that Halloween becomes Crawloween because he has this thing about bugs. Ugh, it's so gross. Personality traits. I think we talked a lot about this already. He's very boisterous, sadistic, creepy, crawly, the thing of nightmares.
Yeah. Makes sense. He's Oogie Boogie.
Yeah.
He's the boogeyman.
Relationships. How do their relationships with other characters reflect their mental state? I don't know. He has minions. He,
He doesn't seem to treat them poorly though, that we see, because I think they just do whatever he wants. So,
yeah.
like they act out of fear for sure and for good reason, but he never actively talks down to them compared to other villains we've talked about this
Oh, yeah.
season.
Like all these other villains have been like, you fool, you idiot.
Hmm. And then he's the
Uh,
town pariah, which means everyone else is afraid of him. So,
yeah. Yeah. That's true. Coping mechanisms, definitely a lot of unhealthy coping mechanisms with this one, specifically gambling. I
yeah.
think there's a lot to unpack there
Hmm.
that we've touched on a little bit. Are there moments where they show vulnerability or a desire for connection?
When Sally's leg is coming through
Oh my
the
God.
thing and he's like, well, who's it? He gets like really excited and then he's like, what? You fooled me? So, not necessarily that that's like vulnerability, but it's definitely a little like, you know,
Yeah. Well,
connection.
I
Sure.
think there might be something there as far as like he has a need for intimacy and love and connection or whatever, or lust, even, I guess. And so, yeah, maybe it's like that disarms him a little bit because he's like, oh, yeah, I don't want to be ostracized and excluded. Like, I want to be part of community and belong. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is there potential for redemption in this character, or what would need to happen for them to change?
No, I think he's just simply the boogeyman and he's a terrifying character and that's that. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I think very much like Shere Khan, he's just doing what is natural to him. Yeah. How does society's perception and treatment of the villain contribute to their identity and actions?
Well, I think that if we're going with the Pumpkin King video game, he's quite literally been ostracized from the community because of his competitive nature. So that contributes definitely to his behavior, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But also,
Yeah.
again, he's the boogeyman. So
Yeah. Yeah. What encouragement would you have for someone who has an Oogie Boogie in their life, who has a boogeyman in their life?
it's so funny we keep using the term boogeyman because that's also what they call Michael Myers in the Halloween movies, which is another of my favorite series. So when it's like, if you have a boogeyman in your life, it's like, No matter how hard you fast you run, he will always catch up to you. That
Mm.
is my sad, sad advice, unless your name is Laurie Strode. Uh, but obviously, I think he's like an extreme. But if we wanted to go a little bit more relatable to real life, like what would you do if you had someone in your life who had a gambling addiction or someone in your life who had like an obsessive personality like his? And what would you do?
I know it's so difficult because Oogie Boogie as a character doesn't have like a lot of redeeming qualities and he enjoys what he does and who he is. In that regard, I would say like it's not your job to change people. And sometimes you just kind of have to accept people for who they are. And I mean, that's what like love at its core is, right? Is just accepting people for who they are. Love doesn't always mean that you have to be involved, that you have to give them passes, that you have to excuse their behavior, because you can care about someone and then also care about yourself enough to know that like they are not good for you and your well-being. I can't really speak to the addiction part. I just feel like that is such a big topic that I don't have a lot of knowledge or experience around, but I know that there are other people out there a little bit more qualified perhaps to talk about such things because it's so complicated. And like
Mhm.
I just think addiction is it's very serious. A gambling addiction is also very, very serious and can be very harmful to not just the person, but like their relationships because often they are asking others to kind of like help them out and bail them out and digging themselves in a deeper hole.
And
Um,
when you bring it up, they get very defensive and most of the time try to hide their addiction or aren't willing to admit it or discuss it with
yeah,
others.
yeah,
I will say, again, neither LB nor myself are mental health care professionals and cannot give the advice we give on this podcast is not by any means medical
medical
advice
advice.
or like even accredited advice. This is like just from our own experiences or because we're talking about things through the lens of media, like
Right.
what we think these characters have learned or are going through. So it's very opinion based. But I did just watch the episode of Heartstopper mm, where Charlie sort of confronts his eating disorder. And I know that's different than addiction, but I think the advice that Nick's aunt gives him is really good about like handling his boyfriend who has this. And the things that she sort of says are provide a safe space for him, let him know that you care, and don't bring up the specific thing that is the problem. So, like for him, it would be food, and for
Mm-hmm.
whatever person, it would be whatever they're struggling with, right? And you can talk about their mental health without specifically bringing up the issue. Like, how are you feeling today? Can we talk about your brain? Like how like are you having a bad brain day? Whatever, that kind of stuff. So I thought those were like pretty good. There was more, but those are the ones that I remember. But it was like provide a safe space and let them know that you care. And that all of your concerns are coming from a place of love. That's all you can really do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I like that part about creating a safe space. I think I have not a lot of people in my life, but I know that there are people that I am connected to that might have a drinking problem. And so when we try to hang out with said people, we're very mindful of not doing something where alcohol is the activity. Like, not
Hmm.
instead of being like, hey, do you want to go out for a drink? It's like, hey, do you want to get dinner? And then the choice is kind of up to them whether or not they want to partake in alcohol or, but they have the option to not. And yeah, just things like that I think are really
Yeah.
important. Like you said, just a lot of compassion, a lot of love. And then I think also boundaries as far as like protecting yourself and your energy. Like I
Hmm.
said before, you can't fix people. You can just be there for them and
Yes.
let them know that there is someone out there who is rooting for them and their well-being.
And that someone else can help them or like they can
Yeah.
get professional help. Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Before we go, I'm just gonna spew out my fun facts. This
Yeah.
So, in case you didn't know this, the Halloween party that happens every year at Disneyland is called the Oogie Boogie Bash, which is really cool. I love that idea. It just started in 2019, which I didn't realize. It's like a
Mm.
relatively new thing. I am a recent Disney girl. Like I'm a new Disney girly. So like I've not known any of these things about Disney. So my first time at Disneyland was actually in 2022. So very cool that they call the bash Oogie Boogie Bash because it makes sense. He's like, you know, he's got a
He's
great Disney aesthetic, like
yeah.
for spookiness. Another fun fact is that Catherine O'Hara voices Sally. So
Hmm.
I didn't know that until like 2 years ago, and I am a huge fan of this movie. But not only does she voice Sally, she also voices Shock, which is the little witch Oogie Boogie boy, girl, whatever.
Oogie
So
Boogie
that
Child.
Oogie Boogie Child. Yeah, it blew my mind. I was like, that both of those are her. And now that I know, I can't unhear it. But
Yeah.
before, like when I found out, I was like, there's no way Sally is Catherine O'Hara. And then yeah, it's very, very cool. Also, Ken Page, the voice of Oogie Boogie, he he basically said that his performance, his when he sang his Oogie Boogie song was a mix between Burt Lair's portrayal of the Cowardly Lion
Mm.
in The Wizard of Oz and Mercedes Cambridge's performance as the demon Pazuzu in The Exorcist. So he
Oh,
combined the Cowardly Lion and a literal demon to play Oogie Boogie, which I think is really cool, honestly.
that's so interesting. Wow. What?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then Oogie Boogie was not originally conceptualized in the original story. He was like added later. So those are I think that's all my I think that's all my fun facts. I have so much written in our show notes. Like if you care to see when the drinking game did this, which we've talked about a drinking game NYC on here before. One of our previous guests, Lindley, has been in many of their shows, and I'm a part of their ensemble as well. Lindley played Sally when they did this, and
Mm.
I remember we had just started this podcast when they performed it, and so I took notes while I was watching it because I
Oh,
was like thinking about the show through the lens of the podcast because we had just started it, and one of my notes says, "Is this a cultural appropriation of Christmas?"
I mean,
Oh, and one of my other notes, which is not a fun fact, it's just a note. I do think that even though Jack is a little delulu, he's very sweet in the way that he delivers his constructive criticism.
hmm.
Like, he's actually like a really great leader. And I have a line written down, but I absolutely for the life of me can't find it of one of the examples. He says,
Oh, try something pleasant. Don't give up.
yeah, it's so sweet.
Okay.
Is this a Christmas movie or a Halloween movie?
Christmas.
Christmas? I think so too. The little boy I babysit said that he thought it was a Halloween movie, and I can understand why a child might think that because it's very scary. Also, fun fact about little LB, the little boy I babysit, when I introduced this movie to him at the age of 6, he dressed up as Jack Skellington for Halloween.
Aw.
So that's adorable. But I also agree, it's got Christmas in the title and it takes place over Christmas. Like Halloween has already happened once the movie
That's
starts.
exactly. That's why I think it's more of a Christmas movie because Halloween has ended. And so this is not taking place during Halloween, although visually the aesthetic looks like Halloween. It is a Christmas movie because they are preparing, not even preparing for, it's like going into Christmas and then he commandeers Christmas and is like, has his sleigh and the presents and the blah, blah, blah. So yeah, I think it's a Christmas movie. As far as Oogie Boogie goes, I think he's a really interesting character. I was gonna say fun, but not in like a he brings me a lot of joy kind of fun. I mean, he's the boogeyman, and I think they did a really good job making him super creepy and gross and weird. Oh, the ending I was gonna talk about. Originally, they wanted to when Oogie Boogie's seams come apart, it was going to be Dr. Finkelstein. They were gonna have him be like basically puppeteering Oogie Boogie, but they brought that idea. This I think this is when Tim Burton kicked a hole in the wall. They brought that idea to Tim Burton, and he said absolutely fucking not, and like went on this whole tantrum and kicked a wall.
Wow. I mean, I think that's an interesting concept. It would be more interesting, I think, if he were a creation of Dr. Finkelstein. Like, it doesn't have to be
Yes.
him puppeteering him.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I see the lines. I see the
Yes.
lines there. And I think that's because he's the only other character that I could see as a villain in this movie. So,
He sucks.
yeah, I like that. I mean, I don't think it would have been smart to have him like under the mask, like in Scooby-Doo, where it's old man Smithers. But
Literally, that was like going to be the idea. But yeah, that idea got scrapped. And I mean, I think it would have been interesting. I think it would have added a lot more like depth that I feel like my perspective, movie goer, watcher perspective feels like perhaps is missing as far as, again, setting up this like big bad versus
Mhm.
a quote unquote hero. But again, we've established there is no hero versus villain. This is all very much just creatures creaturing.
Creatures creaturing. And
Yeah.
with that, thanks for listening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Tune into our next episode, which is the roundtable, where we're going to gather a bunch of our friends to talk about this season and villains that we've talked about and we haven't talked about. We're not entirely sure where the conversation's going to go, but it's always a fun time. So, yeah.
Yes, and if you want to read my dissertation on The Nightmare Before Christmas, please become a patron and read our 4-page long essay about. In this essay, I will. Bye! Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mental Health Multiverse. You can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at mhm.thepodcast.
And join our Patreon for as little as $3 for bonus and additional content.
You can follow both of us on Instagram and TikTok, HB at Heather Bodie.
And me, Marissa/LB at littleben_notbroken. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to share it with a friend.
Screenshot it and tag us on Instagram or leave us a rating or review.
Thanks again, and we'll talk to you again soon.